Welcome to the news of the day on Wednesday. Trump supporters stormed the Capitol in D.C. after gathering earlier in the day to protest irregularity in last November's presidential election. Now, the gathering remained peaceful until demonstrators breached Capitol security Wednesday afternoon. One woman, a U.S. Air Force veteran, was fatally shot in the melee by police. 3 others died following medical emergencies, and many others, including Capitol Police, were injured. President Trump has been accused of inciting the violence. After the rioting began, the president issued a statement asking the protesters to go home in peace and respect law enforcement. Why are we seeing more frequent violent political protests here in the U.S.? And what needs to be done about this rioting? Joining me now to help unpack it all is sociologist and president of the Catholic League, Dr. Bill Donohue, and president of the Acton Institute, Father Robert Sirico. Welcome back to the program. Happy New Year to both of you. Your take on what we saw yesterday on Capitol Hill. There's been a lot of spin about this, what this means, what happened here. I'll start with you, Bill.
Well, I think we all have to understand that as Catholics, we reject violence in any kind of wanton form. Obviously, as a veteran and as a Catholic, my religion and certainly my country understands that there's a necessity for self-defense, whether it be the individual or the nation. But what happened yesterday was simply morally wrong. I understand the anger, the pent-up anger, but we can't be duplicitous like the other side. Because what we saw last year is that the very people who are hammering the president now were the ones who justified and indeed provoked the violence that took place by Black Lives Matter and Antifa.
Father Sirico, your take on this. I mean, violence is always wrong, and it has to be condemned always, no matter who the instrument of it is. That's my take.
Well, I want to identify myself with what Bill said, but kind of look at it from a different point of view. The reason we need to be outraged, morally outraged by what we saw in D.C. yesterday has to be the same reason that we were morally outraged by what we saw in Seattle and Portland and Minneapolis. It has to be the same thing. We can't be tempted to a kind of moral relativism that somehow justifies the one, and it's a kind of me too, you're worse than me. I think that it is deeply tragic that the president, in effect, egged this on for weeks leading up to it. And I think that has to be confronted very honestly, in the same way, as Bill said, that Biden and Harris failed to denounce the kind of similar violence that took place in those contexts. I think we have to be very honest about the whole thing.
No, we can't use partisan politics to forgive or cover violent acts. They're always wrong. And, both of you have touched on something. We have for a year been teaching people, teaching our children, teaching society at large, that statues, memorials, the places we share in public are of no value if they offend you or if they're a demonstrating point for you of protest. We've been taught that they're of no worth and that it's perfectly admissible and a form of protest to destroy those things. So I wasn't shocked when I saw people breaking into the Capitol, but I was deeply grieved by it because it's a continuation of the same sort of violent protest we saw all year. It's just coming from a different political point of view. Bill Donohue, I'll get your reaction.
Right. I mean, we have one terrible incident that took place in Washington this week. We have how many incidents in New York City and around the country that took place last year? And again, the celebrities, the athletes, all these other people who are now outraged about this. Look, we have a governor here in New York who sent in all kinds, thousands of National Guard troops from New York to Washington. Why didn't he send them into New York City when they were destroying New York, when they're setting the cop cars on fire and thrashing everything? Why did de Blasio, the mayor, come to some great empathic understanding of what went on? Why are we lectured that the people who were involved in yesterday's were white people, but you can't mention any white or black people last year? I mean, the duplicity is just endless, but this is typical of the left. They want us to buy into their narrative. I condemn violence in any of these forms, and it's easy for us to say because we are even-handed. The real blame here goes back. If you are someone who feels aggrieved and you're on the right, I'm not going to justify it, but if you feel aggrieved and you're on the right, and you see for month after month after month last year that people who were aggrieved on the left got away with impunity, with no penalties, summer of love, let them do what they want, cheering them on, then you're going to finally say, you know what? What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And that's exactly what the root cause of this is. One more comment. As a sociologist, I am interested in the root causes of anger and of violence on the left or the right. Isn't it interesting that the talking heads in the media are only interested in looking at the root causes of BLM, Black Lives Matter, and Antifa kind of anger and protest and violence? They want to understand it from the standpoint of somehow that the white people caused this to happen, privileged people. What about the people who feel aggrieved, who are Trump supporters, who feel that they have not gotten a fair shake? Is there anybody going to take a root cause analysis of their violence? No.
Father Sirico, I want to play something for you. I am amazed when I opened up my Twitter feed this morning. Voices from the Catholic world, I use that term very loosely, trying to put this violence in a different framing, spin you might call it. Listen to this.
This is a result of the lies that have been spread by President Trump and many of his supporters, casting doubt on a legitimate election. This is the result of sin. We see what sin does now. Many Christian leaders participated in this kind of language that was used, including many Catholic bishops and priests who framed this election in terms of good and evil, who said that voting for President-elect Joe Biden was a mortal sin, or that they would go to hell for voting for him.
Father Sirico, is it raising moral issues in an election? Is that what caused the violence on Capitol Hill?
Well, it's the violation of moral issues that created the violence on Capitol Hill and Portland and all the rest.
Right.
What would be a very interesting exercise is if someone went through Father Martin's or the other kinds of tweets and just shifted the context. That is, apply the same moral analysis to Minneapolis and Portland and Seattle, and then just rewrite it in that way. Would the moral consistency? I mean, let's not pretend that it was just conservatives who decried the Biden political agenda and warned people about the danger of supporting it. It was also the left that said the same thing about Donald Trump. And I'm kind of not exactly in the middle, but I am not pleased with either side in this. And the important thing is that we cannot allow the fact that when people lack moral standards to give us some kind of permission to lower our own moral standards. We have to hold the same level and the same outrage in both contexts. And the violation of the secular sanctity, if you will, of the nation's capital, which is a more vivid symbol, granted, than the other places, is not that much morally different than the violation of a coffee shop or a grocery store or a retailer in other contexts. The violation of that private property, which is sacred, is the violation of our national symbols as well.
Well, Bill, I was intrigued by the lack of curiosity and almost non-reportage of a couple of Antifa riots on New Year's Eve, one in Portland, Oregon, one in Philadelphia, and they attacked federal courthouses with Molotov cocktails. It got virtually no context, no coverage, and there was no moral outrage. Now it's suddenly as if there's an insurrection and the whole government is being toppled because, a few lunatics run into the Capitol. Your take on the way this is being spun and the political retribution we see hurled in the wake of this violence?
Yes, it's not only New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. We've seen this routinely. We see it still in New York and in other places around the country. You got this incredible double standard. Look, I remember back in 2008 when Barack Obama said to get into people's face. Maxine Waters said, get into people's face. Cory Booker said, get into people's face. Now, is that an incitement to violence? I would say no. But if you're going to say that Trump, who never asked anybody to directly engage in violence, is inciting violence, then I suppose by inflammatory rhetoric, if that's how low the bar is, you have to include all of these people. And there's a lot more than just the few that I just mentioned there. All of the celebrities, people like Chris Cuomo on CNN, who came out there to try and justify the violence. And now all of a sudden they're suffering apoplexy. Now, this is rather duplicitous, and it's rather sickening to see this kind of selective moral indignation. And I condemn whether it's coming from the right or the left, so I don't have to live in this world of uneven moral standards. They do.
Voting resumed Wednesday, Father Sirico, to certify the election results. Many Republican senators had planned to challenge the Electoral College votes. They later chose not to in the wake of this violence. Finally, the electoral results confirmed Joe Biden in the wee hours of the morning. So if these protesters were trying to help their cause, it looks like it backfired because many of the grievances, the upsetments, the irregularity in the voting process was never aired because of the political tension they had created in that moment.
I think that's exactly right, and that's another reason, as though we needed yet another reason, that this kind of lack of discipline, this kind of lack of understanding of what we're doing. What are we trying to do? We're trying to build a society that is virtuous, a society that is good, where there can be cooperation.
Yep.
And just hurling barbs back and forth and promoting this kind of division, which is exactly what Marxism wants. Are conservatives now going to engage in the same thing? I say we need to sit back and very serenely say, yes, the president did say intemperate things, and yes, Maxine Waters and Cuomo and the rest of them said intemperate things that encouraged people to violence. That's the truth. There's no sense in trying to defend one side at the expense of the other. This is a horrible situation, and it needs to be completely repudiated totally.
Yeah. Bill,
Raymond,
are
can I
you
just add one
concerned? I
thing?
mean, we're seeing... Yeah, go ahead. React, and then I'll ask you a question.
Yeah, just one thing I want to inject here. Dozens of people who were killed by protesters last year. That's a fact. No anti-Trump or pro-Trump person yesterday was involved in any kind of violence of killing somebody. 4 people died. Yes, 3 of a medical emergency condition, and 1 woman, a veteran, was shot. She was shot by a cop. In other words, the people stormed the Capitol yesterday, the Trump people, wrong as they were, not one of them killed anyone. The same cannot be said about Antifa or Black Lives Matter last year.
Are you concerned in the wake of this? I mean, you have Nancy Pelosi coming out saying the 25th Amendment should be invoked, or she will move articles of impeachment against Trump. There is a broad brush being applied to anyone who supported Trump. Are you worried, Bill, about the demonization of people being used by politicians and how that could exacerbate just the thing we're seeing? This is one of the root causes. You said there's a lack of curiosity out there about what caused this. Clearly, it was disaffected people who felt an election laws were overridden in their localities. They came to Washington to protest, and they felt no one was hearing them. Clearly, that was a part of this. Are you worried that this is going to double down and increase the powder keg that we saw the other day?
Well, now that the Democrats, who never complained about violence, as I said, during the Democratic National Convention for 4 straight days, are now going to be in control here in a couple of weeks. Yes, I am concerned because the playbook of the left, and this is not liberals I'm talking about the left, who have now made major inroads in the Democratic Party, the hardcore left. Their goal is to intimidate. They're bullies. And they want the people who are those people who like the views of Trump and his policies, if not the persona of the person. They want us to shut up and go away. And there's already an attempt to do so. We have the National Catholic Reporter, which is an anti-Catholic newspaper, which Catholic Church's teachings on sexuality and hammers at popes that they don't like in a vicious fashion, now blaming people like myself and others for the coup that took place in Washington. This is how absurd it is. But if they think they're going to intimidate people like myself, boy, they don't even know who we are.
Yeah, this becomes the thing that breaks my heart is when people use tragedies like this, particularly politicians or partisans, and they break the flamethrowers out and they just start trying to brand everybody, burn everybody, make them the sinners for whatever's happening over here. The fact is, as intemperate as what Maxine Waters said, she went urging people to confront people at a gas station and a grocery. You don't blame her then for every time somebody breaks a window on Fifth Avenue. Right. In the same way, I think we have to take a breath here and say, okay, who's really to blame? Yeah. It's not people, it's not scribblers, it's not people, who are in the public eye defending civil rights or a bishop. This is crazy. The president of the USCCB, Archbishop Jose Gomez of Los Angeles, had this to say this week in the wake of this violence. He said, the peaceful transition of power is one of the hallmarks of this great nation. In this troubling moment, we must recommit ourselves to the values and principles of our democracy and come together as one nation under God. Father Sirico, your thoughts on what we can do to heal this fractured nation. This speaks to the disunity, I think, in the soul of America today.
You know, I don't in any way want to come across as a liberal. I hope that my credentials are sufficiently solid that no one would mistake me for this. But I think we need to begin recognizing that there's a division in this country, and the only way out of it is for us to listen to each other and not throw things at each other. It's easy for me as a conservative to paint the demonstrations that I've already identified as irresponsible violence, and there certainly was that. And when I look at what happened in Washington, and I know some of the people who were there, I know the intentions that they went with. I can say, those people were not involved in this violence. Maybe they were manipulated, maybe they were caught in the passion of the moment. I think we need to say the same thing. And in effect, you said this, Raymond, just now, that there are a lot of people that are caught up, and there's a smaller group of irresponsible, ideological people who are bent on destruction, bent on violence, and those people need to be isolated and identified. Those thoughts, those principles, those politics need to be identified and excised from the body politic. We need to begin a new conversation. And I would invite that. I'd be happy to talk with people on the other side to really make an effort to listen to what they're saying and what their concerns are. Now, that doesn't resolve the issue. That doesn't mean that I'm going to give up my own moral convictions for that. But we've got to stop this. This is not tenable.
No, I agree. I agree with what you said. There are people bent on destruction. They want to destroy the other. They want to destroy their, in this case, political opponents. And we've got to get away from seeing everyone through a partisan lens. That is so destructive. Bill, as a sociologist, what is the impact of this? How do you frame the moment that we're in now, and how do we get out of this?
It's been building for a very long time. Radical individualism, I think, is at the core of it. The family breakdown. There's a lot of things, the nihilism which has been flouted. But let's remember this. We got to get out of it. Yes, I agree with Father, and it has to be led by good priests like him, and good rabbis and imams and ministers and others have to come together. I think we need the religious community. But let's keep in mind one thing. We have had dozens of examples of violence in the street over the last year since last spring. Every single one of those cases was caused by left-wing radicals. We have one case of right-wing radicals. All are wrong. But let's keep in mind where the real problem is. It's not on the right. It's on the left. They're the ones who started this last year. And I'm not justifying what happened in the Capitol. But if you really are concerned about violence, you have to know where the real problem is. It's on the left. And they're founded by foundations. They're protected by the media.
But Bill,
Father, you wanted to add?
Honest. Yeah, I don't think we're white nationalists, but there are white nationalists who have identified with and been affirmed even by the president. And we need to disassociate ourselves with that kind of stuff. Those people also have created violence and violent situations and have attacked people. South Carolina is an example of it. So I think we need to kind of try to do our best to be as objective as possible. We need to be ruthless with our principles and our ideas and gentle with our neighbors.
Yeah. Well, I think the ideological default that everyone has been engaged in, and I think the worst parts of that came out of the election, where you had Catholic against Catholic and evangelical against evangelical, using faith and even moral principle as a battering ram against the other person, where everything became ideological conflict. That is not the way forward. And now that the election's over, that has to be put aside. But I will tell you, I see no sign of it abating. In fact, it seems to me the temperature is being turned up by certain parties who want to cancel or demonize people who are out there and making a difference. I pray that this spirit will leave us, and soon. Father Sirico, Bill Donohue, thank you both for being here. We will check in with you in the days ahead.
God bless.
Thank you.